Hi everyone, back with a video to help you through integration paper 2. So let's start by just kind of thinking about the concept of media before we actually engage in the assignment. I started here with the instructions and I cited something from Stuart Hall. He says there are dominant ways that we read media and there's preferred readings. And if we read a film or a text or an advertisement or even a song, we often can map the way that we read it to social institutions themselves. So he says we say dominant because there exists a pattern of preferred readings, and these mappings both have the institutional, political, and ideological order imprinted in them, and themselves have been institutionalized. And so Hall suggests that we read media in a very specific way that's guided by the dominant ideologies of our society. But Hall's also arguing that the media itself can also become a social institution and inform the way we read other forms of media and other forms of policy. So I want you to take a look at two major images. So let me actually start by guiding you through the second one, the greaser stereotype of Latinx people. And so let me go ahead and click backwards here. And so I'm on the main page again here, and let's go ahead and click on the video associated with Latino representations. The way I'm introducing this video is that the year is 1914. On the California and on the actual US Census, we don't really see the term Mexican yet. And so we know that Latino people are still considered American citizens, and by default, they're ambiguously white, and they hold this very peculiar position in America until around the year 1924. And so as you can see, this video production in 1914 really kind of helps us understand at least the sentiment against Latino people. And we know that they weren't necessarily explicitly immigrants upon annexation, but you can kind of see here that if we click on this Bronco Billy video, we can already see that the title itself kind of implies difference. We have an actual name that humanizes a main character in Bronco Billy, and then we have an actual name that is very stereotypical and doesn't offer this particular image any type of human characteristic. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on that really quickly here. And I am going to go ahead and maybe scroll into a screen here. And so, sorry about the advertisement. I'll pause it right here. And as you can kind of see, at minute about 2 to 3 minutes, we're seeing the quote unquote greaser present himself as a threat to white femininity. And so when we look at media, gender plays a really, really big role in the ways that we decode whether a person is someone that we should relate to, someone that we should see as an insider. And in this case, when we say insider, we're referring to American citizen, American by nationality, and in the year 1914, really, we're thinking about whiteness. I want you to kind of take a look at some of these videos in this way. If I go ahead and keep playing it, you can kind of see here that the quote-unquote greaser isn't represented in the same way that Native Americans are. The Native American images are largely quote-unquote savage, whereas the quote-unquote greaser, the Mexican American, occupies an interesting and peculiar racial position. Although kind of dressed like a cowboy, you can kind of see that he's represented as dirtier, as darker, and as a threat to white femininity, and in this case being rescued by a very classical form of white masculinity, the cowboy. And so what I want you to do is take an image like that, go backwards, and go ahead and go to this worksheet right here. And so if I look at kind of like the way that I want you to think about this, in this first box, if we look at the greaser, I want you to really think about the way that the image is created, described, and encoded. And so I want you to kind of think about gender characteristics. How does the greaser and the greaser's representation, how does it compare with normal, quote unquote, representations of white masculinity or white femininity? Although you can kind of see that the greaser does have kind of these quote unquote American characteristics, he's being triangulated away from normative whiteness or normative masculinity, represented as a migrant, as a vagrant, and in many ways not American. However, one of the things that we know about the greaser is that Mexican Americans are eligible for American citizenship, and laws like the Naturalization Law of 1790, right, give Mexican American citizenship, and there are still no immigration laws or policies that really regulate Mexican migration northward. And so, in the same way that a law might actually create an image or a representation, in the case of the greaser, we're actually seeing that these types of images, these media representations, actually may introduce new policies or new social institutions that help, in some cases, generate or drive or promote new ways to regulate Latino people and thereby triangulating them into people of color. So, if we look at the Nye article, we can kind of see that there's a lot of information around the way that Mexican Americans are treated. But one thing that I want you to kind of key on is if I scroll up a little bit here into our last week, we can kind of see here that the image I have is of the Border Patrol. And if I scroll down a little bit and click on this resource, this is from last week, you could see that the year 1924, the Border Patrol is established. And so, although Mexican Americans and Mexican people do have eligibility to American citizenship, media helps promote this idea of the migratory threat that in many ways we still hold today as a nation. And the Border Patrol is established to be able to regulate Latinos coming in, largely using things like immigration taxes, literacy tests, but largely also using the healthcare system, the actually American public health system, to help prevent Latinos from moving northward despite their eligibility and despite the fact that they're not represented in the quota system. And so if we go ahead and click back, I want you to do the same thing for the MAMI image. And so let me go ahead and scroll back down to our integration worksheet. And so kind of think about the way that the MAMI is encoded. But opposite of the greaser, instead of thinking about what the MAMI introduces into law and policy, think about mapping the MAMI backwards. What are the laws and policies that really kind of promote the image of a happy, in some cases, right, slave or the happy house servant? And think about digging into the Zinn textbook and finding some of those laws that really kind of shape the way that the MAMI is represented. I'll introduce more of the MAMI in an email message to you, but I hope that helps.